quite often when we discuss grants and commercial investment, it feels like they are very different things, very different beasts, and it's difficult to think of them both at the same time. And I was helped to make some sense of this, which is, of course, both of them are about investment of capital and what return you're able to get on that capital. And in the case of a grant, you lose your capital. You lose your financial capital, but at the same time, there are anticipated artistic and social capital returns, and that is what the grant maker is interested in. On the other hand, commercial investment, the aim is to get your money back, as Joe rightly reminded me. It doesn't always happen. But the idea is you get your money back and you do get some kind of financial return as well. And there may be, no reason why not, there may be artistic and social returns as well. And so what we have as the session this afternoon is that I thought the best thing was to start with two people who are at those two extremes. One is Joe Smith, who is a freelance producer and chief exec of Stage 1, who is, well, you'll qualify it for me, Joe, but you are in the commercial, you're in the commercial world. Next to him is Pete Staves, who is the senior relationship manager for theatre and touring at Arts Council England, and is covering the national touring strategy at the moment. And Pete is in the grant world, but beginning to look outwards. And my other three team members are somewhere in between all of that. And so I thought, get the two extremes set up, and then let's explore three different stories in between. So Trupti Patel is the social investment fund manager at Esmee Fairbairn Foundation. Gavin Stride is director of Farnham Maltings. And lastly, Ginny Buckley is co-founder of crowdfunding CultureCrowd. Yeah. So the way we've planned to do this is they will each make a short presentation of about 3 minutes, which will open up their particular approach, but also I hope there'll be some stories, examples to tell to bring that to life. And then, I know this is a very short session, but we want then to have as much time as possible to open this up to you for questions and comments. So, let's get going. And could I turn to Joe?
You know what my approach is just raise the fucking money. So yeah, I'm a commercial theatre producer. I did actually work in this organisation for 10 years in the 90s, both under Richard Eyre and Trevor Nunn, before moving to America and working as a commercial producer for 4 years, and then coming back here and continuing that side of my career in the commercial theatre sector. I'm currently represented in the West End of the Drama Game. I'm also producing Memphis in the autumn, and have just finished working with Hampstead Theatre on the transfer of Good People as well, which is just finished. So that's kind of a little bit of a précis of what I've been up to. I'm also the chief executive of Stage 1, which is a kind of unusual charity. There is a lot of alumni among you at the moment, and most people who know who you are, because there's a lot of producers in the room. Predominantly, it seems, there's a lot of producers in the room. And effectively, it's a charity that supports and nurtures aspiring and upcoming commercial theatre producers through bursaries, apprenticeships, through teaching workshops, and through investment as well. So it's a charity that has a kind of dual aim, really, and it raises money from private individuals, from the trust and foundation sector, and from corporations as well. But its aim is to nurture the next generation of commercial theatre producers and show good practice in the industry and pass on that good practice from people who work within the industry. And indeed, the job that I do, the philosophy of it can only be done as a part-time job, because the idea being that everyone who teaches on the courses and provides support for the organisation has to be a working producer. They can't become stale or not up to speed with industry practices. Two observations I have, because I know we've only got about 3 minutes. No one invests in theatre who doesn't love theatre passionately. I've never met an investor who invests for financial reasons alone. It doesn't exist, basically. And the other thing that I just wanted to say as well, which is kind of broadening out the scope really and sort of providing some kind of bridge into the subsidised sector. I think that commercial producers often get a bit of a bad rap for many different reasons, particularly in the press actually. But I'm not going to list them all now, but I think people will be astounded the amount of projects that are developed in the subsidised sector where the commercial producer has gone to that subsidised theatre and had the idea in the first place. And it's the good grace of commercial producers, or what they don't often do, is take any credit for that activity. So I just want to just put those two things out there as well, about investors and about creating work. So that's all I want to say.
Very good. Thank you. So Peter,
shall I chip straight in?
Yeah, please do.
So I work for Arts Council England. We're the country's development agency for the arts. Our mission statement is achieving great arts for everyone. And when we invest, we're investing because we believe projects are delivering that. We believe great art makes life better. We believe it teaches us about ourselves, each other, and the world around us. And the everyone bit is we want more people to benefit from that. We work a lot with independent producers. It's been really interesting hearing the discussions this morning talking about how we need to break down the kind of false distinction between the subsidised world and commercial world, and that, of course, lots of us are existing in a grey area, and we do recognise that. I suppose the main way we invest in work by independent producers or by commercial organisations is through Grants for the Arts, which is our flexible funding system, funding stream. What we want to understand when people whose business models might be generally independent or often commercial come to us to talk to us about accessing some subsidy is, can we do it? We talked a lot about the Matthew Bourne model this morning, and the investment of subsidy into organisations that distribute profit in any way is problematic for us, and it's very complicated. There are certain ways when we can do it, but it's not a straightforward thing. There are legislative problems for us in that, but we do work hard to try and make it work when it makes sense. And the second thing, and kind of more important, is what difference does this subsidy make to that producer's work? What is it allowing them to do that their kind of standard independent business model doesn't allow? We are, just to give an example of that, I spoke at a kind of presentation about Grants for the Arts a year or so ago at ETT Studio, and an independent producer called John Walton, who runs a company called Full Espoir, came and talked to me afterwards and said, I've got a perfectly good business model where I take shows around that are successful on kind of touring circuits. It makes money, I'm fine, everything's good. I've got one show that's gone on in Edinburgh, a bit of a quirky show about the young Winston Churchill. I'd like to take it around to rural venues, to community halls, and to some small theatres. It's not going to work unless there's some subsidy. And we sat down and talked about it, and we were very happy to see that what he wanted to do is reach a new touring circuit, reach some new audiences, take a kind of work that doesn't generally kind of tour on those circuits, and have a go at seeing if you could make it work. We were very happy to support that, gave him some money, and it toured quite nicely for 32 venues this past winter. It was important for us for John, in that case, to say to us, you know, I'm not trying to tear up the way I make and tour work in order to become an organisation that needs subsidy to do that. He was very clear that this was for this one particular show, and it had a real purpose, and it just made sense, that particular partnership. You know, it was going to be bringing great art genuinely to new audiences, which we were very happy to do. Another example has been we've supported Esmee of Fiery Angel to tour Bristol Old Vics productions of Goodnight Mr. Tom and Swallows and Amazons. We're going to be working with them on another one soon. And there we've worked with Fiery Angel to put certain structures in place around the accounting and around the planning and around the financing of those projects that mean we are able to contribute money towards those. As Julius said earlier on, you know, we do recognise that more relations and a more complicated relationship between investors, philanthropists, and subsidy is necessary, is good for theatre, and is going to become used more and more as we go. And we are looking at different approaches. I can't remember who it was who said the Arts Council described, Moira described the Arts Council term as an oil tanker, and it is. but we are making some small moves towards that area. I think the theatre tax credit is going to be really good news for us all, and we're really pleased to be part of the discussions around that and making sure that it works for the not-for-profit sector as well as for profit-making theatre. The creative loan finance is a scheme that has been piloted and is rolling out this autumn, and is about bringing together the creative industries with some business advice to help them get ideas ready for presentation to loan financing organisations who are interested in creative industries, and that's going to be rolling out this autumn. It's a tricky one because the kind of loan financing is very different from the two established models of subsidy on one hand and investment on the other, and has disadvantages against both of those. But there are projects where that might work. There's some social investment stuff that we're involved in as well, which is really good. And we're working with UK Theatre at the moment to do a bit of a survey and an audit of the different kinds of relationships between producers, venues, investors, philanthropists, subsidisers, and audiences that are going on at the moment, some of the interesting experiments in that way that are happening, and thinking about how the Arts Council's investment mechanisms might, over the next couple of years, flex slightly to encompass that. So potentially looking at a combination of loan financing, cash flow support, combinations of grant and investment, some kind of underwriting thing. We're interested in exploring all of these and hope to bring some of them about. Their works in progress.
Thank you, Pete. So, Trupti, over to you.
For those of you not familiar with us, the Esmee Fairbairn Foundation is one of the largest grant-making foundations in the UK, and arts is one of our core sections of funding. In 2008, we set up a social investment fund. It's an impact-first fund, which basically means that the primary objective of investing is to achieve the same impact that's aligned with our charitable objectives. The financial return is secondary. Within that social investment fund, we set up maybe about 18 months ago what we call the Arts Transfer Facility. The aim of that is to enable subsidised arts organisations to participate in the transfers of their work to the West End. We want to enable the subsidised organisations essentially to get a role in that transfer and to get a seat at the table, and ultimately to earn a financial return from their work. We started off, it's still a pilot, we've done it with a handful of organisations, small handful of organisations that we have an existing relationship on the grant-making side. So this is another way of supporting them essentially, or trying to use their capital, not just the income. We started off thinking that the financial income back to the organisation was the primary objective we were trying to achieve, but through our experience so far, we've realised that there's actually quite a lot of benefits arising back to the organisations that are really worth doing. So, for example, giving them a seat at the table, allowing them to work alongside a commercial producer, and the experience and learnings that comes out of that. So, for example, selling tickets in a 300-seater home theatre is very different to selling tickets in a 700-seater in the West End. So, the different approaches of marketing that comes around that, all that learnings basically go back to the subsidised organisations, and we found that really helpful. And that's been one of the key feedbacks we've got from the organisations we supported. I think other impacts that we hopefully will achieve are more longer term. So raise the profile in the sector, increase the number of supporters they get over the long term, increased artistic opportunities. But I think that's a much more longer term objective. The other thing we've been trying to do is encourage the organisations to build up their own, to approach the supporter base and build up their own essentially angel investor network. So hopefully in the long term we're not needed. That would be a successful outcome from our perspective. I think that's about it. We're still in the pilot stage, as I mentioned, so we're still learning as well. I think investing in the arts is very different from investing in other sectors or grant making. But so far we've found quite a few beneficial outcomes both ways, really.
Very good. So Gavin, to you.
Okay, as an aside, I, as someone working at Farnham Maltings, we're interested in opposites and things that are posed as false opposites, and there are a number of those. Contemporary is against experimental, high art as opposed to low art, amateur as opposed to professional, subsidised as opposed to commercial, and we're always interested in a conversation about how they might be posed as opposites and divide us, and that's why we were interested in curating this day. I'm going to tell you one story, which is a story. Farnham Maltings also is a producer. It produces mainly in the subsidised sector. We produce a number of companies, and I'm just going to tell one story which I don't think we would have been telling 5 years ago, and it is this. So one of the companies we support is Little Bulb, and as producers, I knew that Bristol Old Vic were interested in someone to make a show for them for under fives, and I also knew that Emma was kind of curious about Little Bulb, so I went to talk to her, and we got excited about the idea of making a piece for their studio space, which we ultimately did. It's called Antarctica. In those conversations, and it does rely on a degree of openness on both parts, I asked Emma what was her budget for the project, and she said £40,000. That's what she wanted to make out of box office. And so we had that conversation, and it came to a point where we agreed, or I suggested that we co-financed it, that we underwrote half the costs of that project. So we weren't actually going to be risking £20,000 because clearly we were always going to take some money in the box office. We were risking the difference between the box office that they were anticipating and what we actually took. In the end, we took slightly more than that, and we split that 3 ways between the 2 of us and the company. Because our view, and Joe mentioned this morning, was that there was a kind of, well, they had to put cash in, they were the originators of the art, so that was split 3 ways. What it did is it meant that we were all absolutely committed to making sure the project worked. There was lots of conversations about, can we not be giving so many comps away? Coming from all parties, we were all absolutely committed to making the best piece of work. But afterwards, well, during it and afterwards, we've all been equally involved, because we all have an ownership over the project, to making sure it has another life. So this year it's going to Battersea for 6 weeks. That was Fiona Baxter, who's our producer, and produces Little Bulb, made that happen. She went to a number of people, and as producers, we found that we're not only getting a return on it, but we're much more actively involved in the ownership of the production. We'll continue to own that production, henceforth. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago we'd have said, great, we're the producers, here's the job, you pay us, then we'll go away. That's it.
Thank you, Gavin. Now, I understand that crowdfunding has not so far been mentioned today.
There's been not a single mention of crowdfunding. Actually, I was going to ask, how many people have used crowdfunding? Okay, so that's better than I thought. I'm Ginny Buckley. I worked as a producer and general manager, generally in commercial West End UK touring for a long time. And then last year I got involved in a piece of research which resulted in the publication of a paper which looked at the possibility, the potential of equity crowdfunding. That is raising investment on the basis of financial return using UK crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding platforms. The UK is unique in the world in that it has provided the FCA provided an environment in which you can raise a commercial investment. In fact, the show that Joe is currently producing in the West End, Jump Game, has £200,000 of money raised from totally new investors, over 220 new investors, from as little as £10. And they've been able to do so because this platform, Cedars, exists. So I got involved in this research because of my own commercial background. I was initially really interested in the commercial application of it. Obviously, I've been really interested in the National's ability to, raise its own investment, retain the benefit of the profit from its own productions and feed that back into its organisation. One of the potential upsides of equity crowdfunding is that any subsidised organisation now has the ability to meet investors. They can go online and find investors, and those investors might be people in their audience, they might be people in their community. Those investors can take part for as little as £10 in a commercial venture that you might be setting up. So maybe the Royal Court, the Young Vic, Farnham Maltings, everybody might have their own commercial ventures fund, and they could be crowdfunding that for a very low entry price. Because we did some research, we did a lot of interviews, I've started consulting for people working currently with some film producers, and we just did a little tiny bit of work for the Globe at the end of their campaign. I also think there's a lot of potential in the reward-based crowdfunding model. That's the model where you offer a perk. And people often confuse it with a kind of development strategy. I think it is utterly different. And we've talked about these very polarised, I mean, all day people have talked about subsidised or commercial. And I really think that crowdfunding is interesting because it comes into a sort of middle ground. Reward crowdfunding, arguably, is a really pure commercial activity because although it's soft money, you're not having to ever give it back to anybody, and your transaction completes at the point at which you send them their reward. Actually, they've got to want to buy. I mean, it is a kind of a sale that's going on. Whereas equity crowdfunding, which is offering a financial return, the entry level is now being dropped from, I don't know, a minimum unit in the West End might be, I don't know, £5,000, £10,000 maybe.
Yeah,
sort of an average, yeah. It's quite high, and you would want to have a range of, investments because you'd want to have a portfolio to spread your risk. Well, actually, it turns on its head the identity of the person who could potentially get involved in a project that was going to have was being conducted on a commercial basis. So it's surprisingly democratic equity crowdfunding, and obviously crowdfunding itself is considered to be a disruptive model because it allows the processes of commercial investment to be done perhaps more cheaply and more accessibly. But it's really early days. It's only been possible in the UK for about a year, and we're still watching what happens. Jamie Hendry raised £1 million online. He didn't use a platform, but it was very close to the principle of crowdfunding. He raised £1 million online in the autumn. There's a UK tour of Happy Days the musical, which raised £250,000 online Pyjama Game, as we've said, and there are a couple of films who've also raised around £50,000 using one of these platforms. But I think that, just kind of looking to the future, this week, on Tuesday morning this week, Art Fund announced that it's set up a fine art specific curated crowdfunding platform on the Art Fund site. And the kind of part of the history of that is that Gavin Turk, the fine artist Gavin Turk, has used Kickstarter twice recently, very successfully, to raise funds for various projects, and he's one of the artists whose projects is on the Art Happens platform. In New Zealand, there's a site called Boosted, which is again a not-for-profit crowdfunding platform. It's specifically for the arts, and they're enjoying lots of success. I really think that the UK may want to be developing a not-for-profit art-specific site so that we can have our own conversation, on our own terms. David Baddiel raised money on Kickstarter for a musical called Infidel, which was he's raised about £50,000 to enhance a production at Stratford East. You may know that Jesse Singer raised $150,000 on Kickstarter for American Psycho last year to enhance the Almeida production. Coney are using Kickstarter. They're putting up very small projects. I think that we should be using it. Please start using it because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's interesting to think of it not as a substitute for anything else, but the way all of this matches in together. You match fund. There are lots of examples of match funding. There's a Western Australian film agency match funded on the basis of response to crowdfunding campaigns. So it's all ahead of us. It's all developing, and I'm really excited.
Great. Let's have some applause for So, actually, a practical thing first. Is it possible to bring up the lights? Because there's some people up there, I'm just being blinded by the spotlights. It'd be good to be able to see everyone. Oh, that's getting a bit better. So, yes, I think actually that last point about not substituting. I mean, what you have before you is a sense in which there are many more opportunities for new ideas, not only, I think, for investing in theatre, But also I loved, thinking of what you said, Joe, about the way you're nurturing the next generation of commercial producers. There's a sense in which skills are being shared and that people who are coming new to this profession are actually having a chance to learn from those who have broken ground before them. But let's open it up. So anyone would like to start us off? A question, a comment? And I think it might be useful both for the audience and for the panel to know who you are. And who's going to start us off?
I'm Louise and I'm a stage run apprentice. And I suppose my question is for Joe about about how about the process of crowdfunding for Pyjama Game and what information you sort of give out to people who might want to invest a little bit compared to the pack that you would give to an investor of more.
Well, the people on I mean, everyone should go and look at the site. There's various ones that do it. Cedars was the one we used, and very specifically we used it because at the end of the process, if the fundraising was successful, the names and contact details of the people who funded your project get handed over to you, which I think is absolutely essential. And you shouldn't ever work with a crowdfunding site that doesn't hand over the contact details at the end, because you're the one who effectively has raised the money. They're the portal, you're the actual seller, if you see what I mean. And I think that we aimed, and it's a lot of work and a big commitment, but we aimed in our both our offering document, which unofficially we call prospectuses, but you're not really meant to use that term, an invitation to invest. You know, they had the same information as the people who were more traditional angels putting in units in the show. The things we did in addition to that were created online content about the show, video interviews with the creative team on the show. So there were more resources at the disposal of someone who perhaps wasn't already a theatre angel and was really savvy about the process to find out much more about the show. So we did a lot of that. We also decided that as well as the financial return, obviously when you're putting in much smaller amounts of money, £10, £50, even £100, are you really doing that for a financial return, or are you doing that because you love the theatre and you want to be involved in it, or you love that particular show, or you just feel excited about it? So what we aimed to do was have a level below about, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was below about £500, where there was a chance to win tickets to a specific preview performance. There was a chance to come and see the show. Do you know what I mean? There was lots of other little, what I would call social dividends that were attached to the process. Obviously, if someone's investing a unit or bigger sums of money, it goes as standard. They come to the opening night and attend the party and get weekly updates and get the figures and do all that kind of stuff and feel very much part of it. But when you've got, as Ginny said, 200 of those people, some of who've only put in £10, you can't offer that service to everyone. What you can do, because of the portal, is make sure that you give them exactly the same information you're giving everyone else about how the show's going, what the numbers are like, anecdotal information, the press information, and all that stuff. So that's a sort of rambly answer, but you know, you do have to, it's all about the accurate flow of information and timely flow of information. And I think we all have a responsibility, if we're using these sites, to make sure, even if your project's not going that well, that that's how you communicate with those people. Because no one really likes financial surprises. They're much more geared up for them if it's bad news, if they've been getting regular updates and accurate updates along the way.
Jimmy, do you want to
I'm an investor in I'm an investor at £10.
Oh my God.
And you know, and it's fantastic because you do get, you get lovely bits of press, you have a sense of involvement. I mean, and that's one of the characteristics of the platforms, is it's very transparent. You can still go online and read the investor Q&A, which Gavin was fronting the campaign, and he was doing so in public. So there were potential investors reading his Q&As with whoever was asking questions. You could track what was going on. That's a very different way of treating commercial theatre investment, and that's, who knows where that's going to go. Sometimes it's not helpful, sometimes it's really difficult, but I think it's good. New investors is just brilliant.
Brilliant. Before we have another question, Trupti, one thing we haven't touched on is what's social investment? would you mind, I mean, because Esmee is not just limited to the arts in terms of their social investment, the environment, all sorts of other things. Could you help everyone and just define social investment?
There's quite a few definitions out there, I would say. As I mentioned, Esmee's approach is, it's simply where there's both a social and a financial return. And lots of different investors will differ in terms of which one takes priority over which, and what's the balance between those two in the investments that they look for. As I mentioned with Esmee, the social return is probably the most important one, in that it should fit with our charitable objectives. Secondary is the financial return, but it is very important because the likes of us, it's coming from an endowment, essentially our capital. Our future grant stream is basically dependent on that capital. So getting our capital back and hopefully a small financial return is important as well. But that's a risk we take and we understand when we go into any deal.
So in the jargon, you may come across the phrase blended return. It's the idea that you're getting both a financial return and actually, if possible, a measurable social return. Next question, next comment.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Mann. I'm stage one.
No, I've never.
And I work in the subsidised sector, and yeah, I guess it's a question about on the bigger end of the scale. I guess it's interesting comment and then a question that I've learned in this stage one. The jargon and the way of making commercial theatre, it was absolutely astonishing. I suggest anyone who is interested, there's so many resources on the Stage 1 website, or even do the course themselves. But I guess it's just really understanding, I feel like a multilinguist, the language we use in commercial theatre, subsidised theatre, etc., etc. So I guess my observation is we all seem to be after the same cause, but learning about each other's structures and jargon, I think it could be quite an interesting, perhaps a follow-up session even to to help each sector learn each other's words. I guess my question is around those people with much bigger ideas. So say, for example, people want to make the next Miss Saigon or whatever, and take it internationally, etc. I guess with the new way of working, how can almost we've got the idea of the small-scale show that can tour, but how can everyone work together for people with big ideas like that to tackle markets like America, China, etc., and bring in lots more money back to the UK, I guess. That's my question.
Would anyone else like to respond to that?
But it's the Arts Council's remit doesn't go beyond the UK, does it?
No, not at the moment, although in the less spending round, we were kind of prodded by the government to kind of develop more useful support for art to kind of tour outwards. So we're talking with the British Council at the moment about how we might collaborate on something to help cultural exports happen more easily. I mean, clearly it's the British Council's remit to present British work overseas, but then there's real value in us working with them to kind of help organisations reach a point where they're ready to start exporting work, and see that as a way of strengthening their business, which serves primarily English audiences. So we're looking at what we can do with the British Council to do that, and there's new funding streams going to be announced for 2015 to 18.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I will jump in, but I think there's been a massive shift since the days of all those mega musicals, and if you look across the West End now, most of the big musicals of the last so many years have all been developed as full collaborations, either directly in the subsidised sector or between the commercial and the subsidised sector. So actually I think there's a lot of language that fits in both, and certainly in my time in the last couple of years at Stage 1, there's been an absolute shrinking of the mistrust between the subsidised and the commercial sector in terms of how they can work together much more closely. And I don't think there will be another Miss Saigon, sort of type thing. I actually think all of those big new musical projects are more than likely to come out of the subsidised sector, which just doesn't seem to be the case in the States, but I think it is kind of here.
Gavin wanted to add something.
Well, I mean, only for fear of adding more jargon in. One of the other things that we do is work with Brighton Preston Dome to run an international platform for independent artists to tour work internationally. That is funded by the Arts Council, so there's absolute commitment to help artists internationalise their practice. It isn't our experience that there's huge profits being made from that work internationally. Yes, work is sometimes given a longer life. For us, what's been much more interesting is that the real value in working internationally has been around reflecting on your own practice and where it sits in the world, and often that's humbling. You know, it's very easy to be great in your own small island, but there's lots and lots of different models which have been interesting from Dream Think Speak, who some of you will know, has made a very nice living out of just exporting the ideas of the work and not just taking his show out. But he's made versions of Don't Look Back in Moscow. He's been working in Chile. Just him going and taking his ideas and making it work. So I think those things happen. And the last thing I'd say is actually all of the international conversations we've been having more and more and more have not been about buying and selling work, but about collaborating on new ideas, on blending and forming creative practice and sharing ideas of practice around the world, because that's actually the thing that we need to do more and more and more, is to compete less and collaborate more.
I just want to add to that, next door we've got the BFI, and in the film world, this kind of collaboration between so many people and so many different markets. I think there's something to be learnt, and these tax structures coming in this autumn. I mean, I studied the film equivalent last year, as well as the LA and China industries, and I think there's something about the film world and how people work together that, you know, just next door, perhaps to as a takeaway, as a suggestion.
Good, thank you. One here, and then you, and then you.
My question is about crowdfunding. Oh, sorry, I'm Hannah. I'm a producer on London Fringe. I may also have just done the stage one workshop. My question is about crowdfunding. My understanding is... Sorry, I have a very quick. My question is about crowdfunding. My understanding is at the moment it's very project-based, so Pyjama Game for a particular show. Do you think there's scope for it to become a longer-term investment in a company or in an institution rather than the sort of one project to the next?
Yes.
Would you like to add anything?
It's a really free. Listen, we're talking about two different things, right? So, reward crowdfunding, the Kickstarter version, I think is about the artist, the creative idea, the passion for the work. Equity crowdfunding, which is a bit of a euphemism because actually Joe has not offered equity in his show. It's the traditional form of kind of sort of loan arrangement. You can have whatever business model you want on those platforms, and it's a question of does your business idea stand up. Tim and I talked last year about the idea of a kind of is there a sort of blended return product that we could invent for not-for-profits that perhaps could be put up on a site that was where your focus was. What is the business model? How are you going to define your returns? And that's not about the projects. Bearing in mind Robert Noble's experience with Adventures in Motion Picture that you talked about this morning, where if you have shareholders who anticipate a return that you can't deliver, then that gives you you have to sort out your business model.
My name's Sam, I work for British Staves Company. I'm not a Stage 1 alumni, I might be the only one. It was a question in regards to ACE funding, and you talked about how receiving sort of ACE funding and sort of stakeholders' investment is very problematic, although not impossible, as we've heard. How would it work with ACE funding or other grant funding, but with a mixture from the social investment type thing and the crowdfunding, where there is a bit of a return, or there is an option for a return with grant funding? I'm just aware that, especially projects that we do, we're not grant funded by one single organisation. It's normally a few funding bodies and trusts and foundations that create one project. So if we were to mix some grants with crowdfunding and social investment, how would that work? Would that sit well with ACE, or would that be problematic?
Yeah, no problem at all. The only thing the lottery legislation by Act of Parliament makes it difficult for us to do is to give subsidy to an entity where some of the profits that are generated from that particular project or that particular year's worth of activity is going to go to investors. That's difficult for us to count. However, there's lots of types of projects where, for example, the Arts Council might support the R&D bit or the development, the initial production, and then the tour is supported by investors, and we're not kind of involved in that bit, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think it's about delineation, and certainly in the bursary section of the, I've seen a lot of applicants come through stage one where part of their overall budget structure when they're asking for some money from stage one is split between the money from stage one, which is given by charity, a project grant from the Arts Council, and then they're going to raise a bit of commercial investment, and often they'll put the Arts Council bit under R&D or education work or what have you. And I'm not telling tales out of school. I think there's a little bit of shifting around you can do with those things and be creative about it, as long as you stay within the law. But I think that that's what people are doing, because actually R&D and education work and other things are all part of the whole. It's just that you can make the whole happen by getting all the different pots of money, if you see what I mean.
And it's worth saying that we've got a chief executive of the Arts Council now who's saying, don't say funding, it's investment. And he's absolutely adamant that Arts Council's money is investment. And I think that's significant in this time.
So just add one tiny thing, which is that I think it's helpful when you're crowdfunding to have people who demonstrably, want the project to happen, because it helps when you're going to crowdfunding. You're talking probably atypical new investors. Really good for them to see that the Arts Council of Heritage has said that they want to be involved too.
Great. Your question.
I'm David James from Book Music and Lyrics. I got two. One is very tiny for Trupti. Is there a difference between social investment and cultural investment as far as semantics? But the larger thing, going back to what you just said, is I was in a panel a few weeks ago at Dance UK about digital fundraising and with crowdfunding. And they were saying all of us are so used to going with grant applications, and we've got to fill out about what are your objectives and what do you want to do and who you're talking to and social engagement and all that stuff. And they said with crowdfunding, it's all about the crowd, it's all about the story. So do you have any tips on how we learn to communicate better as far as the storytelling when we're used to having to look at grant applications, which are very, how do we...
Okay. We're running out of time, so we're going to speed up a bit. So a quick question to Trupti.
I mean, when you say social investment, I guess I go back to, with the Arts Council, when you got things like public engagement. I mean, is social investment, we're looking at communities, or is culture the same thing within the semantics of what you're saying?
I think it's the same thing. So in the arts context, all the cultural stuff comes very much into play, basically. That's positive impact.
Ginny, forms of communication.
It is completely different to the language and the kind of style of approach that you would use, that a development department would use or a marketing department would use. Completely different. I was told a story yesterday that there's a documentary about Slava's snow shows being made. The investors who made the biggest difference, they were kind of flatlining at the beginning. Suddenly, at the end of it, Rufus Hound tweeted about their project, which is a fantastic project. Rufus Hound tweeted about it. It wasn't Rufus Hound's tweet, but it was the fact that it was picked up by a rapper who tweeted it to his followers. So the documentary for Slava is mostly being funded by a ton of rappers in East London. I think there are enough. I really think that people talk about rules around, about percentages, about how much you raised at which point, how you're going to end up. It's really early. It's kind of the Wild West. You've got to be authentic. It's the only thing.
Yeah, and at the other end of the spectrum, the two bits of information that we put out there that had the biggest impact on the Pyjama Game was Richard Eyre talking to camera for 30 seconds about why he loved the show, and the other one was that the story of the funding got picked up by the business pages of the Saturday Telegraph. and they were the two biggest days we saw spikes in when we posted the video and when it was published in the Telegraph. So that's the antithesis of that. That's about absolute traditional media, if you see what I mean.
Okay, no, we're running out of time, so you and then you, because all the questions so far have come from this very energetic although Stage 1 alumni. So you first, and then you, and I think then we need to draw it to a close.
I'm not a Stage 1 alumni. I'm from the National Centre for Circus Arts, formerly known as Circus Space. Say that first. I think there's a sixth model, which is commerce, full stop, which is to do with using the value of the art that we're creating and selling it in a way that isn't just about selling tickets. We've got Circus Space, National Centre for Circus Arts, does a lot of work brokering relationships between artists and commercial organisations that want to use them. And what's very interesting about that is, in almost 100% of the cases, these artists have been able to create a new piece of work or do the initial R&D of a new piece of work that is then used to deliver whatever purpose that commercial organisation wants, whether it's for an advert or a huge arena show or whatever, and then take it away and turn it into something that then is theirs, and they can tour and develop a more personal version of it. And we found that at least 3 projects that we have supported so far have come from work that's been done on maybe one event or for something very specific. And that is a purely commercial relationship. They're selling their talents to get the time to do the thing that they want to do.
Great.
My name's Trish Wadley, sorry, Stage 1. A quick question for Trupti, which is I wanted to know more about the arts transfer facility. You talked a little about helping productions get to the West End, and if you had any examples you could share or how it works.
Yeah, so typically how it works is a commercial producer will approach the subsidised organisation because they are interested in a piece of work and they want to transfer it to the West End. Typically that organisation doesn't have pre-reserves to invest in that transfer, so they always hand it over and they get it originated, produced, royalty and so on, which is quite minimal, I guess. So what we do is we invest on behalf of that subsidised organisation in that transfer. So if the what we call the pre-capitalisation budget, so it's kind of like a set of costs. If there's a budget of £400,000, the subsidised organisation is given an allocation of say £100,000, we will invest on their behalf that £100,000. The profits we get from that investment, assuming that the production recoups and all of that, we share that with the subsidised organisation, so they essentially earn an unrestricted financial income out of it. We also want to ensure that in that transfer, the organisation gets a role in the transfer, so they're not just handing it over. They do get a seat at the table, which means, you know, artistic control over the production, having to say things, but also as a result learning from the commercial producer team. So that's how it all works.
And is there an example that you've done?
So we've done, for example, with the Almeida, we participated in the transfer of Chimerica to the West End last year. With Young Vic, we did a Doll's House.
What are the social returns? What do you quantify as a social return to that fund?
So in that, it would be, it's measuring numbers and not measuring numbers. So one would be, how much extra income did that organisation earn by participating in that transfer, by us investing on their behalf?
But that's financial, what is it?
Well, it's financial, the financial return is to us, I would say. We sort of look at, okay, what can they do with that money, you know, in terms of additional projects, all that kind of stuff. So you're taking a bit more of a longer term, more strategic view, I guess. But it's also things like I mentioned, like the learnings they get out of it. You can't really quantify that. For us, that's the social return because it makes the organisation a lot stronger in terms of building up the team's capacity and their skill set. It's, you know, getting the profile out into the West End to new audiences, building up the supporter base. For us, that's the social return from that investment.
I'm going to have to draw this to a close. I'm sorry that we didn't manage to get all the questions in. I would just like to say one thing before we have our break, apart from thanking you and thanking the panel, and that is that I've learned quite a lot about social investment, but not from the arts. And I've learnt it from the health sector, the social development and welfare sector, education and so on. And in many respects, they are further ahead than the arts sector. But one thing I'm absolutely convinced about is that never should a form of activity, some new idea, just be pulled straightforwardly into the arts sector and expect it to work. Your sector is very different, and I think there's all sorts of exciting work that's going on in this space in terms of financial products and measurement and all that sort of thing. And I think what is so important is that people like you have a role in making sure that this growth in terms of all these things in between straight subsidy and straight commercial investment, that you have tools which are useful to you. I am very worried that, you may have heard about social impact bonds, which is a form of investment in the social sector starting in criminal justice. These things should not be just straightforwardly brought into the arts, and you have a very important role, I think, in making sure that you have tools that are suitable for the arts sector, and indeed within the arts sector. Quite often you can't generalise about that. It's for theatre, it's for film, it's for dance, it's for visual arts, whatever it may be. So in that journey, I wish you all success, and thank you all very much.